Hey everyone, my name is Eric and I'm the product director for the dev section. Today we are doing a review on our Northstar metrics. And so we're working through the process of iterating on what these Northstar metrics should be. And so I've kind of set this checkpoint up with the team so that we could share with one another on some of the thinking that we have around our Northstar metrics. We'd like our Northstar metrics to be a metric that we can track for each of our groups, and in some cases each of our categories, depending on how expansive the group is. That'll essentially be something we measure and track how well we're doing in that stage. So it should be a metric that is something that we believe we can modify and change and grow. And then by tracking it, we can understand how successful we are. And so very simply, the agenda is essentially going through each of the groups. Obviously, we've got 17 groups in dev. So if you do the math, I think that's no more than 2 to 3 minutes on each group. But obviously this is meant to be collaborative. It's meant to be something where we not only challenge one another on some of our Northstar metric thinking, but also something where we learn a little bit more about the other things and the other metrics that other team members care about. One of the things that I've been trying to figure out is how to do more cross-team type activities and get more exposure for each of you into other groups and stages. And so I thought this would be good for all of us to review together. So without further ado, I will hand it over to the Manage team.
Cool, thanks a lot, Eric. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about the Northstar metrics that Manage has kind of been thinking through. But before we dig into specific metrics, there are two general thoughts that I wanted to kind of also articulate. And one was, one of the goals that we had for this exercise was really to make sure that we were creating Northstar metrics that could really be owned by an individual group, and they were largely unilateral responsible for driving. What I wanted to try to avoid were Northstar metrics that were somewhat that were dependent on confounding factors, where if we had like another GitHub acquisition type event happens, that like rising tide lifts all boats, it becomes a little bit harder to figure out whether or not the things that we're actually doing are actually contributing to our Northstar metrics. So we're trying to kind of like find things that are resistant to some of these confounding factors. And also one thing that we tried to do during the discussion was really like think less about what's measurable, what we already have in the data warehouse, and think about what total success for the group looks like. If like it's completely lovable and everything is amazing and people are attaching themselves to the things that we're shipping with great KPIs, what is the profile of that world look like from a KPI standpoint? Kind of work backwards from there. So I'll start with the two groups that I'm kind of working with most closely. The first one was access, and the proposed Northstar metric there is really the shared instances and groups on GitLab.com that are using non-username password authentication. So this is LDAP, SAML, OAuth, and smart card. In the logic that I kind of typed there in that link under why, I actually think that one of the best measurements that we could find is just the raw number of users that are joining and using GitLab. Because like as you add more of these more enhanced ways of onboarding users, it makes the end result is that more and more users are able to join. Onboarding becomes more frictionless. You're able to have like a great system for being able to pull users onto and therefore the number of users goes up, which is highly correlated with business value. But I actually didn't recommend that we go with that for the first iteration because it's highly subject to confounding factors. Where like users that are joining is something that's being driven by many other factors, and access is able to control like the lovability and configuration of like these enhanced kind of enterprise grade authentication strategies a little bit more directly. So that was kind of the logic around that. We may iterate on this further, and right now the status of this is we're verifying how measurable this actually is, and then working to maybe find out where that gap is, what we can measure currently in Periscope, and then adding additional things to the usage ping is kind of be discovered. But that's kind of the current thinking for access. Any feedback on that?
I can type this, but you have, as written in the issue, the percentage of instances / groups on GitLab.com. So do you care just about GitLab.com here because that's what we can measure, or do you care about instances self-managed?
I care about instances very much. So that is the share of instances that are using the number of top level groups on GitLab.com, since GitLab.com and self-managed are measured a little bit differently. So cool. I would like to see a combined figure for that because I care about both.
So are you just going to average those two percentages then?
Well, so adding up the number of instances and the number of top level groups on GitLab.com should get me a denominator. And then the numerator should be the number of instances that are configuring and the number of groups on GitLab.com that are using these strategies.
Cool.
Cool. So for analytics, we were debating that you can click on the why for all of these to kind of think about what the logic was and some of the logic, this kind of stream of consciousness as I was thinking through this stuff. And I think that the number of unique users using analytics features was the metric that we kind of aligned on. I originally was thinking about retention, like monthly retention, as kind of like a really useful way of thinking about this, to say like, of the users that are using our analytics features, how many of them came back and used that same feature a month later? I think that this is really good in terms of it's a hard metric to game, but it's also a very hard metric to move because you have that month lag time between anything that you ship. So retention is useful, but what we aligned around was we should be thinking about this in terms of weekly actives to say like just the number of unique users that are using our analytics features. If that goes up and to the right, either we're improving our retention or we're increasing like the scope and the breadth of what we're able to do and attracting more users to the number of analytics features that we have. So that was kind of the logic for that. And I think that this is currently measurable for GitLab.com, at least with using Snowplow. So the next step would be to just create a prototype kind of a dashboard for this and use that and create some goals around it. John Mason, does that make sense to you? Any thoughts or thing to contribute there?
Yep, I think we're on the same page there. I think we do want to also be looking at the retention as well, but as kind of a subset of that number. But the overall number is what's going to move soonest. So it makes sense to look at that.
Cool, thanks. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about compliance?
Yep, and sorry I'm late. Was on a interesting call. Yeah, so for the compliance group, Jeremy and I talked a lot about what would make sense, because something like compliance is, I guess, arguably a bit passive in nature, in that it's kind of this pervasive theme or set of activities that occurs within an organization to make sure that things happening within GitLab adhere to company policy, which makes the company compliant with some legal or regulatory framework. So we broke it down into what we've dubbed compliance-related actions. That's things like, searching through the audit events table, interacting with things like setting the number of merge requests that had merge request approval settings, number of merge requests that had, so sorry, just blanking. But these actions that, when we look at it at a aggregate activity view, we can see that the number of interactions with these different parts of the product indicate that there's value being derived from it, particularly around things like audit events, right? The more that people are searching through audit events tells us that they're getting more and more value from that because they need the traceability of what's happening within GitLab. The number of merge requests that have merge request approval rules on them is indicative that there's value or validation that there's a need to compliance check or gate these changes to production. So I think that's where we're coalescing right now, with kind of the expectation that we'll refine that or maybe pivot slightly as we implement more features and determine what might be more appropriate. But that also may not change yet. We're still kind of determining that.
Melissa, do you want to voice over your question?
Oh, yeah. Well, basically, as I'm thinking about these compliance features, it's not every user that would be interested in this, right? Like, for example, if I take GitLab, there's probably like 3, 4, 5 people that are in charge of compliance-related things for the whole org, right? So I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate to say, like, for a specific group, or I don't know what level, right? But maybe not users, but in a specific set of users, that they're taking advantage of these features, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that might be the like, Matt, what do we mean when we say eligible customers? Because when you and I talked about this, we talked about like just scoping it down to maybe like the paid users that are even eligible for using this. But like, are we thinking about this at like the instance level to say like, of all of the EE instances out there, like at the instance level, are they using compliance related actions, or were you thinking about it more at like the user level?
I would say it's probably more at the, sorry, not user level, but what was the first one you said, at like the instance level?
Yeah,
Or
instance / group for GitLab.com. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like it would be at the group for .com or instance level for self-managed, because individual users might be doing the search actions, but there's not necessarily one particular user that needs to see that data, such as like for audit events. And then if we find that in fact number of merge requests with these approval rules is in fact a valuable metric, that's not really a user action as much as it's organizational policy. So that'd be my rationale there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thanks.
And Matt, so you are including MR approvals as a compliance feature, it sounds like?
Yeah, I generally lump that into the compliance program context. I think there's a separate camp that would probably argue, well, peer review is good for code quality, period. But if we extrapolate that out, usually code quality is one component of a compliance program for like the SDLC or InfoSec policy. But I would argue that it serves more value for those compliance stakeholders and groups.
If you're trying to be compliant to a regulatory standard, you would absolutely call that compliance. It's like a DO 254, ARP 4754, DO 178, any of those absolutely would be part of compliance.
Well, and you could also argue too that like even in a entity that's not necessarily regulated, but they have an InfoSec team that says, hey, we just don't want to deploy vulnerabilities to production. You're technically being compliant with internal policy. So yeah.
Cool. Harris, over to import. Oh, sorry, Eric.
So yeah, just a general question. I guess this probably applies to both compliance and analytics. I think you both kind of proposed these aggregate measures, right? Like how many people are using an analytics feature, and you could probably do a double click down into what's an analytics feature. And then Matt, you've kind of said, hey, everyone's taking a compliance related action. So these are now becoming like very complicated but aggregated type Northstar metrics where you have to do a significant amount of logic to get them. How feasible is a Northstar metric like this to implement for you, Matt? And I guess back to analytics, Jeremy and John Mason as well.
So I don't believe I have an answer for that yet. I do have an open issue with the data team to figure that out, both what's currently available, what can be tracked or collected, and then progress the conversation from there to then determine that feasibility.
I agree with that. I mean, I think that it's hard to figure out a way of getting around that. Analytics, it covers like 8 different features. So and right now we'd like to see increased engagement in all of them. We at the moment don't have a outstanding way of measuring customer satisfaction. We don't have an outstanding way of attributing like sales to particular like stages or groups. Either of those two might solve that problem. But for right now, if we're focused just on what we can measure in the product, we kind of have to have an aggregate because of this fact that these groups span across large swaths of the product.
Cool. Harris, looks like you're up next.
I am up next, and I was just editing the wrong page. So I'm going to put these in because I'll be talking about the whys and why is this the right metric? And these are the questions that I started with. So I'm going to start with these questions. The questions that I feel kind of roll up to: are we pushing? Are we making the step in the right direction? And are we making progress in the right direction as far as the importers go? And the kind of questions that I want to be asking, that I want to make sure I get the answer for is: A, are we building the right importers? So are we picking the right platforms to migrate people from? Are we picking something that's obsolete and people won't use? So are we picking the right things? Are these importers easily discoverable? Are they easy to engage in your process of creating your instance and populating your data? Are they easy to use? And do they work well? So, are they stable? Do they work every time? Or have you tried one, didn't work, and then never came back? So I felt like all four of these questions really roll up to this metric that we selected for import. And that is, measuring the percentage of all new projects that are created using import. So out of all the new projects that get instantiated, and right now this is, somewhat in single-digit numbers when compared to the number of new projects that are instantiated. Single-digit numbers that we get projects that actually get imported, that get data imported into it. It is probably good to qualify this or to narrow down the new projects we look at by looking at just projects created within X number of days of the instance being created, because that's where we expect people to actually use the importers to move their data into GitLab. And I think the further down and further away you are from that initial creation, the less likely you are that you have work left somewhere. So, looking at the new projects being created in an instance that's been around for 4 years and it's got a lot of old work, it's unlikely that's going to be an import target. So looking kind of at the fresh instances or fresh groups being created in gitlab.com and looking how many of those do we actually support with importers and trying to move that up. And I feel that if I can answer these four questions with yes, we're doing the right thing in each one of these, this number will move up. So our North Star is to move this number, to start measuring this number and then start moving it up with every milestone that we deliver something for. Thoughts, questions? I'll let Jason type it out because I think he's got a comment.
Just an observation that automated, in my experience of like an automated migration capability, is that they unblock deals, just the presence of them, even when they're not actually used. And many times teams will actually choose not to use them for good reasons. They want to leave cruft behind and so on. But being able to say, we've got it, actually allows you to, put the ink on the paper and get the deal closed. And just something to keep in mind as you're thinking about representing the value of that going forward.
That's a very good point. I mean, there are some immeasurable values that we do get with importers, this being one of them. But also the whole first impression. So sometimes like the importer is one of the first things that people do, and that can actually have lasting impact on all the other aspects of our engagement with that customer. So if the import breaks, if it errors out, if it times out, if it takes 24 hours and people just kind of give up, it does have a lasting effect. So the effect of first impression or the effect of a bad first impression is something that, is kind of a more of an immeasurable value of having the feature. I agree. Patrick, do you have something you'd like to voice over?
Hey, yeah, I was just going to comment, like currently, I don't know if you're familiar with our Jira integration usage. We currently track just via usage ping. We have something like 1.3+ million projects that are using a Jira integration. It may be worth monitoring that, not as a Northstar metric, but just monitoring that as like a correlated metric. See, like in an ideal state, where everything is perfect, we should see that number driving to 0 as everybody imports off it, right? So it's something to consider.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of metrics that are mixed with other things at this point, right? So I feel like This one that we've selected is really more of a true measurement of how we're doing. So if this number goes down, then I feel like we're not doing the right things in import.
Yeah, I just thought I'd bring it up as a food.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'll look into that. I'm curious what those numbers are and compare.
Yeah, I'll paste a link in Periscope here in a second.
Thank you.
One of the things on the importer, sorry, one quick thought that I think maybe Gabe and I had talked about, like for importers, the Jira importer as an example, one of the ways we were thinking of this is how many customers use the issues, like have high engagement on the issues they import after they've been imported, right? This might not be Northstar metric, but another sort of sub-metric of if a user imports or customer imports a bunch of issues, do they just die? Like, do they just languish inside of GitLab? Or do users start commenting and engaging on those issues after they've been imported? So something to measure like post-import quality, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Or how, yeah, I guess that's a good way to look at whether people are just importing things for historical. Like if we were to move somewhere else, we'd bring thousands of issues that have no movement because they've just been there for 4 years and no one's touched them, and they're going to continue to sit there. So how many of those issues are really, something they want to do in the future versus just kind of having that historical trail of all the things they've done?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I put a comment that was asking why time limited or why even thinking about like limiting the time. And I was thinking sort of my own usage of importing projects. And sometimes it's, I mean, obviously I've been at GitLab more than 90 days, had them online more than 90 days. And there are times when like, there's a project on GitHub that I want, and I just import it because I want to test the functionality of something like in GitLab. And I don't know how common that is for customers. I know there are lots of customers that like mirror projects from GitHub back into their GitLab instance and like do things like that. And so I'm wondering if like the 90-day metric is sort of like not the right way to time box that, because I think the value of like being able to grab a project sort of whenever I want.
And maybe we'll pull both and compare them and see which one gives us a better indication. What I'm really afraid in this case, if I just look at everything, is that the importer, like any improvement, might actually get lost in the rounding errors, because number of imports versus number of just blank new projects is so small that it's easy to get messed up. And so I want to look at the population of new projects that have a high chance of having an import. That was it. That was kind of the reason to narrow it down to get a more valuable metric. So something that might move from 2 to 3% or from 3 to 4 versus 0.5 to 0.55.
Yeah, because one scenario to consider is like if people are transitioning right from another tool, they might do it in phases. Right, like one department might do it, then another one, then another one. So it may take longer than 90 days.
Yeah, we're clearly going to miss some. So maybe good, and I'll look into this, to maybe pull both numbers and then decide like which one is looking better as a North Star.
The difficulty with the measuring metrics of this entire thing, and I'm sure you've run into this, is people are generally going to import once. So if you make improvements to the product, how are you measuring that your improvements made any difference? The people who are going to import today are not the same people who would import in 90 days. And with us releasing tools and approaching more enterprise level companies and more regulated industries, I think we're going to see that impact our potential customers, which is going to have much more of an impact on your metrics than anything else, is the potential customer base. Because you're either going to import or you're not. It's either going to work or it's not. But once you're done, you're done. So like, it's very hard for me to understand how you measure improvement to an importer when it's a one-use thing and it's industry specific and customer specific.
But it's overall success, right, for any user. So it's like a set of users were not successful a month ago. Now there's a different set of users, right? It's not one-to-one, but it's just in the population as a whole, are they successful?
Are you measuring successful users or just users?
Well, we're measuring how many imports we get. So a complete import. So if the import was failing, so if we had a problem and GitHub importer was just down for 3 milestones, that would definitely, we would see that dip. Like that would be visible regardless of whether we're moving to more enterprise users or not.
But you're saying successful
Harris,
whether or not it works. I'm saying they import everything and then they go, this didn't do what I expected. It still looks like a successful import from our side, but it doesn't make them any happier. They're not going to use the data because it wasn't what they expected to happen.
No, I think you're
can you just
either. They're going to just say, oh, that doesn't work. Never mind.
No, I'm with you on that point.
Is that something that would fall upon the import group though, to like make sure that they're successful once the import has happened? Because like surely the goal with the import group is to successfully import people into the product. If they've decided the product is not fit for what they need, that's a whole separate problem.
It is, but you can define a successful import in multiple ways. One is, yes, we transfer the data. Another is we transfer the data in the way it was meant to be used. So look at the Jira importer is a good example. Did they get all their tags across? Did they get all their other Jira-esque items across in a usable fashion? They might come across and evaluate our product and say it doesn't meet our needs because we didn't get the data we needed. Even though it was successful, it might not be organized in a way because we didn't link things up together. Jira has a ton more fields than GitLab does right now. If the data pulls across in a manner that's successfully pulled across but not successful or usable to them, I'm not saying it's the importer group's fault. I'm just saying it's your numbers. They're going to come across and go, yeah, it still doesn't work for me. They're not going to try it again. They're going to say, okay, we either need to manually change all our things over or reevaluate our decision to migrate to GitLab.
Can I just jump in before I have to drop to like another call? And what I want to say, Harris, is because I've been thinking about SLOs on the Gitaly team. I think it might be like interesting to consider just directly measuring success and failures, because the feedback I hear in calls is that like, oh, the importer just doesn't succeed. Like it hits an error and fails. Like that is something that's directly measurable, and it's also directly fixable by your team. And so if the percentage of time that customers are able to complete an import when they click the import button is increasing, that's like a net win. And that's like, you are in control of that. I think Marky makes really good points about total usability, but I think the starting point is you want like a clear metric that you can actually aim for and individually control. So that could be an interesting way of approaching it. Maybe it's not the primary Northstar metric, but having some sort of SLO for import success would be, I think, a very useful supplementary metric.
Yeah, I definitely consider that a sub metric, and I think at least 2 out of the 4 questions I mentioned here do speak to that. Like, are they easy to use and do they work well? And that does roll up. So if more people are able to complete successfully the import, I think our Northstar will catch that. And to Mark's point, Mark, I agree with you, and that is something I've been thinking about. One thing that actually is a mitigating factor for us is that it is not just a one engagement with the importer. For a lot of the companies, especially if they're larger, even medium and smaller companies have tens and hundreds of projects that they want to migrate over. So if they fail on the first one, or the first 2 don't bring across the things that they care about and there's no tags, they may give up. So I think we might capture some of that sentiment still, even with this. But you're right, it's not clear. It's not an easy number to just point and say, okay, that is the exact number that measures import.
Right. I mean, you're going to have some customers that simply can't import their data in, even though they'd like to, because for regulatory reasons, they can't move their data or they have to re-review everything. And therefore, they're out of the running entirely. But they might love the tool. They'll import everything over just to have, but they'll never interact with it. And they knew they wouldn't from the get-go because they're required by law not to move their data. It happens.
Let's go ahead and move on. Harris, thanks for taking the barbs of the team. This is partly why we do this.
Awesome. This is very helpful to me.
Yeah,
thank you.
Cool.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Harris. We've got 20 minutes, 30 if we really want to push it. So let's go ahead and move on. Looks like Luca, you're up for spaces next.
Yeah, cool, thanks. So we went through a few different thinkings around like what might be a good Northstar metric for spaces. So for those of you who are less familiar with the spaces group, our biggest focus is enterprise readiness. Predominantly, we're focusing on GitLab.com right now and providing a platform by which enterprises feel comfortable subscribing to GitLab.com, which in the past has not been something that many larger enterprise companies have wanted to do. So how do we measure that success rate? How do we know that we're starting to check those enterprise readiness boxes? Some first thoughts that came to mind were, how many self-managed migrations over to .com? increase.com revenue, upgrades from bronze to silver gold, those kinds of things, but they're too vague and they're too dependent on other areas like of the company. But thinking about things like subgroups and users, which is they're the two main categories of the spaces group. They're both pretty well aligned with our business model. Number of users directly correlates with our billing model, but it's kind of a little bit, it's still more related to like sales. Number of groups is a more interesting way of looking at it. But that's always going to go up, right? So you can't really track by how many groups do we have on GitLab.com and I suppose those self-managed instances that we have data from. So thinking about this a little bit more granularly, you could think about active groups. What counts as an active group? Like a group that has at least one active member in it in the last 30 days. And then if you're kind of digging into more around like enterprise readiness, like we want to think about what counts as a large group. Jeremy proposed like these two numbers, like one active member and large would be at least 10 members. Those definitions are open to other suggestions, but that's kind of where we've come to at the moment is to think about like how can we shape our Northstar metric around like the groups aspect, and then because group managed accounts is something that we're focusing on right now, that might be an interesting drill down metric that we can look into, like how many of these large groups also have group managed accounts enabled, because if you have groups that are being created that are getting bigger and bigger, like that's a good thing. Like we're having groups that are having members added, like groups are getting larger. So that's kind of where we're at the moment with the proposed Northstar metric. Does anyone have any thoughts, questions, ways we could improve that?
I just asked one question, which is, can you distinguish user activity in their group versus personal activity on an account?
Yeah, it's hard. That's what. So in the definition, like at least one active member. So we have a attribute on the member, which is last activity on. So you can see when the user was last active, but it doesn't attribute like was that activity actually in the group. We need to work with the data team on this. In the past, I've created like a way of like looking at different events and attributing, like if there was an event in that group by that author in that namespace, then you can consider that an active group. But it's tentative and a little tenuous. So
I don't know that that really matters either for like most of the enterprise accounts that I've seen. Those are like more group managed accounts and other things that it's probably not the same as like those of us that work at GitLab that might do both sides of the table with one account.
Yeah, agreed. Cool. Thank you so much, Luca. Maybe we can move on to Plan and Justin. Thank you. Sorry for taking up so much time to manage y'all. I appreciate the patience and the collaboration here. It's amazing.
No, this is great, and I'm glad we're having this discussion. We can actually skip over mine. I don't need to voice over it. Just some observations I had, or we had as a stage, kind of broadly. So if you have thoughts or feedback, drop them in there asynchronously, and we can jump on it. But let's go to Gabe and talk about each one.
Sure. So I'll try to go through this quickly. The proposed Northstar metric is unique users commenting on issues across all GitLab instances. Why? I think right now, like this is a better indicator of teams collaborating with one another versus somebody who might be the one creating all the issues or tracking total issue count. The hypothesis is if more seats within a given instance or team are participating in issues, they're going to get more value out of it. This is intended to be a temporary Northstar metric because as I talk to users and as I talk to Hila, like the customer value is really abstract, and that the value is really like, does the tool enable me to maintain trust with my stakeholders? Which, you know, like how do you quantify that? It's sort of difficult. So this is intended to be a starting point, especially as Plan is becoming more usable in larger organizations. It will also help us understand adoption, expansion, and then ideally retention. So this first proposal would be open to feedback if anybody has anything.
Yeah, I wrote it in. Obviously, I don't know that much about current usage patterns or anything like that. But my only comment would be just based on previous experience, is that comments for teams that are co-located, it's not used as often, at least in other tools, right? Because they just kind of turn around and make a comment to someone, and they may not do it in the tool, right? But still consider the tool as their source of truth, so to say, for everything about that issue. So that would be my only comment on this, is that it may not be there. You may miss some large percentage of people because they're not using comments for what we think they should use it for. Does that make sense?
I would agree with that. I think also on the converse, if you just count something like issues created by a synced user, you also miss out on the other dimension of people who could potentially be collaborating on planning within GitLab. So it's a good point.
Well, I think that brings up an interesting point. This is directly able to be influenced by how Gabe works this. If we can make comments lovable, then hopefully that would increase commenting and reduce the side discussions within a co-located organization.
I had a question. Like, that is, I don't know if I phrased that correctly in the doc, but do we feel that comment activity is always correlated with business value? Because like, I totally agree, and I love the idea of like commenting on issues is more indicative of collaboration on the issue in the issue tracker than just like creating issues and then they just sit there orphaned and no one actually engages with them. But I was thinking to myself, like, there's actually no business value associated that's directly associated with commenting activity, because that's not associated with any paid tiers. It's something that's available in core. But if the case is that customers that are highly engaged in paying for project management features are always like correlated with high comment activity, then maybe that's something that we can use. But is that always, do you feel like that's always true, or is there like a use case or a pattern where like customers like aren't using the issue tracker in this way, but they're still paying for like project management and getting a lot of value out of it?
I don't think we know that yet, and can't know that. Like, I think the problem right now is even on our usage pink, we're tracking notables, but we're not even distinguishing notables across MRs, issues, epics, snippets, and all the places where comments are actually being made. And we're also not correlating that to any sort of like business value at this point in time. So by tracking it at first, like the idea is we'll start to be able to at least expose additional dimensions of which we can like better understand leading indicators. And if you drill into the issue that I linked, the work in progress, down below, I kind of basically extrapolated out like, this is temporary, and this is temporary so that we can start recording all of these other things across all instances via the usage ping, so that we can eventually figure out how to better determine customer value by things like what's the lead time, right, for an issue between when it's open and closed, or what's the throughput, not MRs, but units of value. How can we calculate a trust factor, or like how many issues are associated to an epic and then also an MR? Like those are all things that like dimensions I'm interested in exploring, but we don't have the data right now. So.
Cool, thank you.
Let's move on. Let's skip portfolio management. I just read Eric's comment. We could pick that up on Monday when he's back, because I would be representing him today. So let's go to Mark for certify.
Sure, we'll do this real quick. The proposed Northstar metric for certify is the number of requirements created. Now, this is given that requirements management is not yet launched. This is going to encompass the launch of the metrics collection, as well as people actually using it. But we do fully understand that this is probably going to change quickly. Within 3 to 6 months, we're going to have to come up with a new Northstar metrics once we understand usage and utilization of requirements. But for now, we're simply just trying to ensure that it's out there and it's being used and we're able to collect data. So that's sort of our first step in launching this new feature.
Yeah, I'm sure you've thought through this, but my gut tells me that like you'll get a huge influx of requirements as soon as it's launched. And then so you're going to see the curve kind of do one of these things.
We'll see. It's that, or we're going to see nothing for a month because everybody's a month or two behind on their self-managed installs, and we can't collect on self-managed. So it'll be interesting to see how this works.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. Is this a time box metric, Mark?
We're just trying to see over 100 requirements created by the end of Q1. So yes, it is time.
Oh, gotcha. Time boxing by the quarter. I'll have the requirements created.
And really what this is showing is we need to get this out the door and we need to be able to collect metrics on it. And that's like job one. And once we're there and we start getting feedback from our users and understanding better, there obviously needs to be a better metric moving forward, but having nothing is very difficult to put a metric on. So right now the metric is to have something.
In your experience, Mark, you know, you might have a massive project and they're continually deriving requirements from, they're continually deriving value from the requirements management tool and the requirements that they've had. But, you know, from our conversations that I've had with you, the requirements definition is largely like a one-time type activity that happens at the kind of the front end of the project, even though you continue to derive value out of the requirements management system. And so you've already kind of caveated all of this with, it might change over time, but I'm curious as to your thoughts on, over time, have you given thoughts to how you might measure continued value?
Long-term, the value is really how many times are people referencing the requirements, which would include how many times are they linking to the requirements, how many times are they going back and viewing the requirements, because that shows that your developers are looking at the requirements to develop their code. It shows your testers are looking to the requirements to develop their tests. The linking will show that they're utilizing the tests and linking them to the requirements to perform full validation. It shows that they're looking at compliance in an overall, and certification as an overall package, and they're constantly referencing the requirements. So it would probably be something along the lines of percentage of requirements viewed within the last, pick a time frame, or something along those lines. Number of views per requirement, something like that. Are requirements being created and then ignored? Because that's not what we want. We want to collect people who are creating them and then constantly looking at them. So I would think number of requirements that are viewed multiple times, or percentage of requirements viewed, you know, once per month. I don't know. We'll have to work on how that works. And that's why I need to kind of get it out there and see how people are using it. But yes, definitely it's something that has to do more with interacting by viewing and less about creating requirements.
I was just curious, because I think what you were talking about sounds like a great way to measure engagement of the feature itself, but do you have like a target percentage of our customers in mind? Like what top tier of our larger companies are going to take advantage of this feature at all? Is there like is it 5%, 20%?
From the numbers I've received and talking with salespeople and talking to customers, it looks like there's a potential for up to 60% of customers who are actually going to want to use requirements.
Yeah,
and that's
cool.
Conservative. So we'll have to kind of see how that goes. What it means is we need to make it a compelling feature that's integrated correctly so they're actually usable. And I fully understand the MVC is not something that most regulated industries could use, but it is something that many non-regulated industries could get a lot of value out of. So we're sort of starting there, and we're going to iterate toward a regulated solution for these people. Did that answer the question? Any other questions?
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you. Yeah.
Sure thing.
Thanks, Mark. I guess we can move on to create and source code.
Thanks. Okay, so for source code, the metric that we were looking at was merge requests. So initially we started with discussions on merge requests because that kind of shows that people are making use of the feature and collaborating. However, as I also pointed out, as Melissa did, that that largely depends on if you're a co-located team versus a remote team and things like that. We think that the better metric to measure that collaboration is going to be merge requests. Now, hearing Jeremy make some of the points that he did, I think that I would further evaluate that to have or to look at the percentage of monthly active users who are using or creating merge requests. And that is so feels more balanced, as just the act of acquiring new users will likely give you more MRs, and feels more balanced to look at the percentage of monthly active users who are making use of MRs. And that is basically because we want to make this category that it's already a lovable, kind of a no-brainer. Like if you use GitLab, merge requests have so much value that we want people to to not consider not using them. I don't know if that makes sense. So the feature has so much value that we absolutely see that value and we want to use those MRs. So having that be a percentage of monthly active users kind of feels more balanced. Yeah, that's so right now the issue that I linked has MRs, but based on this conversation, I think that I'll be updating that to the percentage of users that are making use of MRs.
I put a quick comment here, Daniel, and I actually don't think that the Northstar metric has to be separate from how we've defined SMAO. I think in certain cases it might make sense for that to actually be the same. But I was just curious, like, is that definition that you have written in 6A2 there actually your SMAO definition?
I don't believe so. I think it's a total number of MRs, but I can take a quick look here.
Well, total number of MRs would not necessarily be a SMAO metric because it's talking about monthly active users. Anyway, I was just curious. It might be something to look into. I thought we recently redid SMAO. It was before you joined the team to focus on MRs created.
Okay.
So basically, if a user created an MR, they would be counted as a monthly active user. Sorry, a stage monthly active user for create.
Okay. Yeah, and that kind of makes sense. I think that kind of has the same. I don't want to say lack of balance, but it feels more balanced. That as we get new users, we automatically get new MRs, and that's. I think that aiming for a higher percentage of the users that are making use of it here in this case kind of feels more balanced. But I will take a look at that. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, no, I think what you've written, like as in who use MRs, I think is an interesting one because I was looking at the data, I think on Tuesday, and even if you say, hey, SMAO for create is the number of people that have created an MR divided by the total number of monthly active users, it's only like 20%. So, and that's because only a very small segment of the population will actually create a merge request. So I think it could be interesting to augment that definition and include people who don't just create them, but also use them.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point.
And Jeremy, you had a comment as well, looks like.
I was going to say a percentage of MAU for who use and create MRs, maybe it works, but I think it maybe also depends on that thought exercise maybe I was doing in some of the other issues, which is like, okay, depending on like utter success for this group, what does that look like? Where are we investing? What are our goals? If like your goal is primarily, we want to increase the number of users that are using merge requests, then I think that makes total sense. The one that what I suggested is maybe merge requests created per user, because you can raise that in two ways, right? You can increase the engagement of the existing users with they're creating more merge requests, or you increase the number of users that are creating merge requests at all. So you're increasing like either the depth of people that are engaging with it, or you're increasing the breadth of the people that are engaging with it at all. So that might be one thing. I also wonder, like, maybe merge requests opened. Is that the right? I don't know if that's the right one to look at. Maybe I don't know if we've considered looking at like merged merge requests, because just opening a merge request is maybe not like where you get actual value from like a merge request, but actually opening a merge request, taking it through review, and actually getting the thing merged. And
yeah, that's a good point.
Making sure that is happening as smoothly and as quickly as possible. So like lovable coder, like source code is probably like merge requests of like open for a very short period of time. They like have multiple participants in it and they get merged very quickly at a very high percentage. So very few merge requests that are opened like don't get merged. There's very few that get closed along the way. And thinking about metrics and maybe capture that scenario might be really helpful, if that's aligned with how you're thinking about success in the group.
Yeah, so I was kind of comfortable with the first one that I have picked, which is just MRs, but I think that based on this, I'll ponder it a bit more, because I think that you make a good point that the value that you really capture is once that is merged, right? You just have a bunch of open MRs that never happened, that you never did anything with. There's not a lot of value there. So I think that kind of takes it a step further, and I like that. All right, thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks for listening, man.
Cool. Good stuff. All right. In the essence of actually adhering to the meeting times, I'm going to go ahead and call it. now. So for the groups that we didn't get to, what we'll do is we'll circle back in the team meeting, and we'll use the bulk of the work section in the team meeting to continue reviews. If you've learned anything from the other groups and want to augment yours, and between now and then, that would be great. We're looking forward to continuing the discussion. I'm really appreciative of all the hard work and thought that all of you put into your metrics. Thanks so much for that. And I think we're going to be really, really well prepared for our first review next week. Thanks a lot, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.